Delaney Wright never thought she'd die here. In a leaning shack with holes in the roof and wind slithering through the gaps in the walls like something alive. But as the pain crested once more in her lower belly, tearing through her like a blade, she knew her body was close to giving out. In her arms, a newborn barely moved. No crying, no squirming, just shallow breaths and a silent stillness that chilled her more than the fever ever could. Nell, her oldest, only 8, knelt beside her, clutching a rag soaked in tepid water. "Mama," she whispered, "am I doing it right?" Delaney nodded weakly. Her lips cracked when she tried to smile. Nell's hands were trembling. So were Delaney's, though she tried to hide it. Wade, her little shadow of a boy, hovered near the wall, clutching the back legs of the white puppy they'd found a week ago. Alone and trembling in the brush. The pup had never barked, not once, but always watched with those wide, solemn eyes like it understood too much. Tonight, it sat still, alert, pressed against Wade's bare feet. The fire had long died out. There was no more food, no more strength. Just children trying to keep their mother from slipping away. And then the sound of hooves. The rancher didn't mean to stop. He had other plans, a sack of supplies on one hip and 100 miles behind him. But his horse slowed without command, snorting and stamping at something ahead. In the middle of the dusty road sat a puppy, white, dirt-streaked, leash dragging behind. Its ears were flat, its eyes glassy and strange. It didn't bark, it didn't move, it just stared. The rancher dismounted slowly, boots thudding against dry earth. He crouched, reaching a hand toward the dog's fur. The moment he touched it, a whisper rode the wind. High, shaking, close. "Please don't take our puppy, sir." He turned sharply. 2 figures stood behind a broken water trough, thin as shadows. A girl, her dress faded and too tight across her knees. A boy, younger, barefoot and silent, clinging to her side. "We're not runaways," the girl said, her voice small but steady. We can't let go of him yet." The puppy had already turned and was trotting back toward them, tail flicking like a thread between 2 worlds. The rancher said nothing, just followed its movement with his eyes. Then he saw it, a crooked shack, sagging like it had taken a punch. No smoke from the chimney, no light in the windows. "Is your mama in there?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, then nodded. "She's still inside." He crossed the yard in silence, his boots crunched over gravel and brittle weeds. The door hung open an inch. He pushed it gently with his fingertips. The smell hit first, blood and sweat and something else, something fading. On a bed made of rags and folded grain sacks, a woman lay curled around a baby wrapped in worn cloth. Her skin was pale, lips cracked, hair soaked with fever. Her eyes were open. She looked at him, not in fear or shame, but as if to say, "I'm still here. For now." The rancher froze, hand drifting to the pistol on his belt, not to draw but to anchor himself. He didn't move for a long moment. Then, with the practiced quiet of a man who'd seen enough, he stepped forward. "How long's she been like this?" he asked. "Since last night," the girl answered softly behind him. After the man left, he didn't ask which man. That came later. For now, he built a fire, heated water, cleaned her wounds, bandaged her legs with strips torn from flour sacks. Set the baby, still silent, beside her heart. The children watched his every move, wide-eyed and still. When the stars came out, the rancher sat on the porch, holding the reins of a horse that hadn't been meant to stop. But he wasn't going anywhere. Not tonight, maybe not for a long time. By morning, Delaney was still breathing, but only just. Fever clung to her like a second skin, her brow slick with sweat, her lips dry and cracked. The baby stirred now and then, but never cried. Just blinked at the world with eyes too old for someone so new. Nell hovered close with a cloth, never once leaving her mother's side. Wade kept the puppy tucked under his arm, whispering to it like it was a secret keeper. The rancher brewed weak tea and mended what he could. He didn't ask questions, not yet. Not when the air still smelled of loss. But something heavy hung in the room, like time itself was waiting to exhale. That waiting ended just after noon. A black carriage crested the ridge, pulled by 2 immaculate horses and led by a driver in a red vest. It stopped 20 feet from the cabin, silent and still. The door opened with the click of finality, and out stepped a woman dressed in mourning black. She looked untouched by dust, by sun, by time. Temperance Dream. The rancher stepped outside instinctively, placing himself between the cabin and the carriage. She approached without hesitation, eyes sweeping the shack like it offended her. "I was told there was trouble here," she said, her voice smooth and cold, like water over stone. "And I see that's true." She held a folded set of papers in gloved hands, thick, stamped, and edged in red. "I've come to claim what's mine," she continued, handing them toward the rancher. "This land, the resources beneath it, and any dependents left behind. Everett Hanlon owed me a great deal." The rancher didn't move to take the documents. His stance hardened. "They're not livestock. You can't own children." Temperance smiled thinly. "You're mistaken. In the territories, a contract supersedes sentiment. These children were listed as wards of Everett Hanlon. Their mother," she glanced toward the dark window, "was never legally married to him. And the infant is not even named." Inside, Delaney had heard everything. With a groan, she pulled herself upright. Her legs trembled as she reached the doorway. The rancher turned just in time to catch her before she collapsed, but she straightened her spine, her voice thin but unyielding. "She has a name," Delaney said. Temperance narrowed her eyes. "Delaney, I had hoped you'd gone by now." Delaney's breath hitched, but she pressed on. "Her name is Hattie. You paid Everett to dig, not to bleed. You don't own what's left." Temperance's gaze swept the children now standing at their mother's side. Nell, tall and stiff with fear. Wade, clutching the baby, the puppy at their feet, ears back. "I will allow you to keep the infant," the widow said, "but the older two are my legal concern." Nell's voice broke like splintered wood. "You can't take my brothers." Temperance didn't even look at her. "Children don't make decisions." The rancher stepped forward, voice like flint. "You need to leave. Now." Her smile cooled into something colder than ice. "Do not mistake kindness for weakness. Tomorrow, I return. With law." And with that, she turned, her skirts whispering across the earth, and stepped back into the carriage. The driver snapped the reins, the wheels groaned down the road. Delaney leaned into the doorframe as though it were the only thing holding her up. The baby stirred in Wade's arms. Nell wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. The air was heavy with something new. Fear, yes, but something else, too. Resolve. That night, the wind howled like it had something to say. Delaney couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like the wheels of that black carriage rolling back down the trail. Every snap of the fire whispered tomorrow. She sat in the corner of the room, the baby against her chest, the children curled in a huddle at her feet. The rancher hadn't said much since the widow left. He stood outside a long time, quiet, watching the ridge disappear into darkness. When he came back in, his face was unreadable. "We'll find a way," he'd said. "If there's a law she can use, there's a law we can fight with." But laws didn't keep her babies safe. Paper didn't feed them. And yet, Delaney knew, if she wanted to keep them, she needed more than love. She needed proof. The next morning, as the sun rose over the frost-laced field, the rancher walked the perimeter of the shack. His boots brushed against the woodpile, the weeds curling around old tools. Something caught his eye. A floorboard on the porch, warped and lifted slightly at one corner. He knelt, pried it back, and there it was. A wool blanket, finer than anything in the house, wrapped around something heavy. He carried it inside. Delaney was feeding Hattie when he placed it on the table. "Found this under the porch," he said. Inside was a letter, folded, smudged, but unmistakably written in Everett's hand. "If I don't return." Delaney's hands shook as she unfolded the page. "To whoever finds this, if you're reading it, I probably didn't make it. My name is Everett Hanlon. I came west for a second chance and found something better than gold, a woman who taught me what love looks like. Her name is Delaney. She has 2 children, no ring, but more grit than most men I've known. She's carrying my child now. If I'm gone, it wasn't by choice. Someone was watching. I was stupid enough to brag. There's gold under the house, don't let them take what's hers." There was more. A second page, notarized. A will. "I leave the entirety of my land holdings and guardianship rights to Delaney Wright in recognition of her loyalty, her care, and the children she's raised under this roof, blood or not. This is her home, and they are her family." Delaney pressed the letter to her chest. Tears came not from sorrow but from a kind of sacred relief. For the first time someone had said it, out loud, in ink, in law. That she belonged, that they did. The rancher looked at her. "It's not filed, but it's real. We can take it to Stillwater, get it entered, make it official." She nodded, eyes red. "Then we go." It took the better part of the morning to prepare. Delaney packed the letter and the will in Everett's old satchel. Nell helped brush the dust from her mother's only decent dress. The rancher cleaned his boots and put on the cavalry coat with the bullet holes still near the collar. Wade stood by with the puppy tucked in his arms, unwilling to let go. They'd barely saddled the horse when the sound of hooves echoed again. Not one set, but 4. A wagon approached from the south. This time, it wasn't the black carriage, but one built for transport, wide, wooden, and grim. 2 deputies sat on the bench beside the widow. "We're here for the transfer," one called flatly. "As ordered by Rainfield Court." Delaney stood tall. "That order's invalid," she said. "We have Everett Hanlon's last will." Temperance stepped down slowly, her eyes gleaming. "Produce it." Delaney did. The rancher handed it over. The deputies read silently, lips twitching. "It's notarized," one said. "Filed or not, it holds." Temperance's face didn't move. "Then I'll contest it, in a higher court." "Fine," the rancher said, standing firm. "But not today. Not here." The widow turned, silent. Her carriage rumbled away again. Delaney felt her knees buckle. The rancher caught her. "It's not over," he whispered. "No," she said softly, "but it's the beginning." Stillwater was bigger than Delaney expected. Paved streets in the town square, a real courthouse with stone steps, glass windows on the general store. She felt small just stepping into it. She hadn't left the ranch in nearly a year. Not since Everett's health had begun to fade. Not since the baby. Now she stood in the middle of a town that didn't know her, holding a satchel that might be the only thing keeping her children with her. The rancher rode beside her in silence. He'd offered to go alone, but Delaney insisted. "If I'm going to fight for this," she said, "I'm going to look the law in the eye myself." They left the children with the school teacher back in Rainfield, Miss Ainsley, a quiet woman who'd taught Wade to read and never asked questions. Delaney wasn't ready to answer. In Stillwater, they handed the will to the clerk at the courthouse. The woman looked at it with raised brows. "Notarized, all right," she said, "but never filed." "Can we file it now?" the rancher asked. The woman hesitated. "You can, but if it's already being contested..." "It is," Delaney said softly. "Widow Temperance Dreen." The clerk's expression tightened. "Then you'll need more than this. Judges around here, they know her." That night, in the tiny inn by the livery, Delaney sat at the edge of the bed, staring at Everett's handwriting. "I thought it would be enough," she whispered. "It will be," the rancher said, sitting on the floor beside her. "We just need to build on it, brick by brick." So they started looking. The next morning, they rode back toward Rainfield, not to rest, but to gather memory. Their first stop was Miss Ainsley. "Delaney raised those children like her own," she said, pulling out school records. Nell never missed a lesson. Wade learned to write his name on her lap. Then the grocer. She came in with holes in her shoes and never asked for credit. But she'd pay full price for soap before she'd let those kids smell poor. The blacksmith. When my wife was dying, she brought soup every Thursday. I didn't even know she knew. But she showed up every week. The preacher. Everett told me once he didn't want a wedding. Said Delaney had already said yes 100 times. Just not with words. Each time, Delaney wrote it down, carefully. Not just the facts, but the tone, the moments, the way people looked when they remembered. "People don't just remember Everett," she said. "They remember what we built." At night, she rewrote Everett's letters from memory. His voice, his turns of phrase. She didn't forge them. She revived them. Words she'd heard whispered late at night or said in quiet awe when he looked at the kids sleeping on the floor. The satchel filled again. Not with law, but with truth. When they returned to Stillwater, it was with bundles of paper, testimony, handwritten notes, and 2 photographs Micah had drawn of Everett with the children. "Will it be enough?" she asked the rancher as they rode in. "It has to be," he said. "If it's not, we make it enough." They walked up the courthouse steps just as the sun reached the highest point in the sky. Delaney's heart beat so hard she thought everyone must hear it echo off the marble. Inside, the judge, a man with a graying beard and deep-set eyes, listened as they laid it all out. The will. The letters. The community. "You're asking me to believe the word of people instead of paper," he said, frowning. "I'm asking you to believe that family is more than blood," Delaney answered. He said nothing, just nodded slowly. "We'll schedule a hearing," he said. "Bring everyone." They left the courthouse in silence. "I don't know if it'll be enough," Delaney said again, but the rancher only replied, Then we remind them of what matters. And behind them, in the clerk's window, Everett's name had just been entered into the book. Filed. At last. For the first time in weeks, Delaney slept. She didn't mean to. Her body simply gave in, crumpled like a page too long held open. The baby was with Nell. The satchel was under the bed. The rancher had taken the night watch from the porch, his rifle across his lap and his eyes trained on the horizon. Stillwater had set a date for the hearing, 1 week. They had done everything right, filed the will, submitted witness statements, rebuilt Everett's letters from memory. Delaney dared to hope, but hope is a fragile thing. It shattered with the soft creak of wood just past midnight. She didn't hear it at first, not the step on the porch nor the wind changing direction. But she awoke to something colder than fear, a silence that felt intentional. The satchel. She reached for it. Gone. Delaney bolted upright, panic roaring in her chest. No, she ran into the hallway calling for the rancher. He met her at the door, already halfway inside. The papers, she gasped, they're gone. His face hardened. He stormed out, scanning the yard. Nothing. The horse still tied, no wagon, just one set of boot prints, leading away toward the south trail. She sent someone, Delaney choked, or came herself. By dawn, a town boy rode hard into Rainfield, waving a notice in his hand. Posted at the courthouse, he shouted. Widow Dreen filed an injunction. Says the will was forged. Says you took the children unlawfully. Delaney sat on the edge of the porch, clutching the empty satchel like it might still hold meaning. Her mouth felt dry, her limbs heavy. She's trying to erase him, she whispered. The rancher crouched beside her. Then we write him back in. How? Her voice cracked. I don't even know what court she bribed. We don't have gold. We don't even have a lawyer. He touched her shoulder. We have the truth. That's more than she does. That night, while the children slept curled together on a mattress that used to feel borrowed, Delaney lit the lantern and sat at the kitchen table. She pulled out paper, ink, and memory. Word by word, she rewrote everything she could remember. Every line Everett had ever said to her. Every promise he'd made. Every moment when he'd chosen her and the children, even when the world said they weren't his. She copied drawings the children had made, Wade's baby handprint, Nell's list of chores Everett had once praised her for. She pressed a small lock of Hattie's hair into a folded note. Then she wrote one final letter. To the court, this is what a family looks like when no one else believes it can be one. These children are not my blood, but they are my breath. I did not birth all of them, but I have stayed. Every storm, every cough, every scraped knee. And Everett? He didn't write love poems, he wrote grocery lists and left boots by the door. But he stayed too, that has to count for something. By morning, the satchel was full again, not with legal documents, but with proof of a life lived honestly. The rancher came in as she sealed the last envelope. He looked at the pile of pages and photographs, drawings and clippings, and nodded. Ready? He asked. Delaney nodded. No, but I'll go anyway. They saddled the horses together, and as they rode toward Stillwater once more, Delaney looked back at the house, not for reassurance, but for resolve. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew what had already happened. A woman with no name, no ring, and no claim had built a home and a family out of nothing but love and grit. And now the world would hear her side. The courthouse steps loomed tall as a mountain. Delaney dismounted slowly, clutching the satchel against her chest like armor. Around her, the town of Stillwater was busy with wagons, horses, and people with papers that made their lives simpler. Hers were just wrinkled pages, drawings, memories. The rancher touched her shoulder gently. You don't have to do this alone. She gave him a tired smile. But I do, he nodded, understanding. Then he stood beside her anyway. Inside, the air was cool and sharp. The wooden benches were polished from years of waiting. The judge, salt and pepper hair, deep furrows between his brows, sat behind the bench, unmoved by sentiment. Widow Temperance Dreen sat poised like a blade at the prosecution table, her lawyer beside her. Their papers were crisp, sealed, legal. Delaney stood. State your name, the judge said. Delaney Wright, she answered, voice steadier than she felt. You are contesting the claim made by Miss Dreen regarding the guardianship of 3 minors and property ownership of the Hanlon Ranch? I am. Do you have the original will? She swallowed. It was stolen. But I've rewritten what I could, and I have letters, testimony, witnesses. Temperance's lawyer stood, "With respect, Your Honor, hearsay and sentimental scraps do not constitute legal grounds for guardianship or land claims." The judge looked at Delaney. "Do you understand what you're asking?" "Yes, sir," she said. "I'm asking you to believe in more than paper." She opened the satchel and began to place its contents on the table. Each page was worn, ink faded, edges curled, but she spoke with them as though they were gospel. A letter Everett wrote when Wade got sick and she stayed up all night. A drawing Nell made of the ranch, labeled home. A baby bracelet engraved Nora, wrapped in cloth. Testimonies from Miss Ainsley, the preacher, the blacksmith. She didn't just raise them, the schoolteacher had written, she rebuilt them. The courtroom was quiet. Temperance leaned forward, her voice calm but cutting. "There's no blood, no legal adoption, no marriage. She was Everett's companion, nothing more." Delaney's voice shook as she spoke. "No, I wasn't his wife. I was the woman who stayed. When his lungs failed, when the storms came, when the fever nearly took the baby, I stayed. And he gave me his name, not just in writing, in the way he looked at me when I held our daughter." The judge turned to the gallery. "Is there anyone here to speak on Ms. Wright's behalf?" There was a pause, then the door opened, and they came. One by one from the back of the room, Miss Ainsley, carrying attendance records, the grocer with a stack of unpaid bills stamped paid, the blacksmith wiping his hands on a stained rag, the preacher in a worn collar, the town nurse, a schoolboy who once couldn't speak but now read because Delaney taught him. "She fed half this town," the blacksmith said, "and asked for nothing. She showed up when nobody else would," said the nurse. "She gave my son a reason to come home from the war," the preacher added. Even the children stood. Nell, her braids tight and chin high, Wade, clinging to the baby, now named and smiling. The judge leaned back, stunned. Then he looked at Temperance. "You may have law," he said. "But this woman has community, and you cannot buy that." He turned to Delaney. "I hereby grant you provisional guardianship of the minors, and until formal probate is settled, you are to remain steward of the Hanlon Ranch." Temperance's face turned to stone. She stood, silent, and swept from the room like a storm with no thunder. Delaney collapsed into the rancher's arms, the children rushing around her. "It's not final," she whispered. "No," he said. "But it's real. And sometimes, that was the harder thing to earn." They came home in silence. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long golden shadows across the fields. The ranch looked the same as when they'd left. The crooked fence still leaned, the porch still creaked, and the same stubborn chicken still strutted like it owned the place. But something was different. Delaney stepped down from the wagon slowly, boots crunching on gravel, Hattie asleep in her arms. The other children tumbled down after her, Nell carrying a satchel full of folded court papers, Wade gripping the puppy by the scruff as if it might vanish again. The rancher dismounted and said nothing. Just looked around, eyes scanning the horizon like a man who expected trouble to follow. "Feels like we won," Wade said. Delaney smiled softly. "We did. A little." That night, they didn't sleep on edge. There were warm blankets on the bed. The children huddled around the hearth while the rancher fixed a broken window hinge, whistling a tune Delaney hadn't heard since Everett's last summer. After the kids were tucked in, Delaney stepped out onto the porch, arms folded against the chill. The rancher joined her. "You okay?" She nodded, then shook her head. "She'll be back. Maybe not with judges, maybe with men. I'll be here," he said. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I'm scared less than I should be." He leaned against the post beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder. "I've been thinking," he said. "This house needs a name, something to remind people it stands for something." Delaney tilted her head. "Like what?" He handed her a piece of carved wood, letters etched clean into its surface. She turned it over in the moonlight. "Wright's home." Her breath caught. He watched her face carefully. "Not just for you, for them, for what you've built. A house doesn't mean much without the name behind it." She touched the letters with her fingers, tracing them slowly. "I've never had a name that stuck. Not really. You do now." They nailed it to the front beam of the porch the next morning, just as the first wind of spring rattled the budding branches. The kids stood behind her, Nell holding a basket of eggs, Wade with his stick sword tucked in his belt like a deputy. For the first time in her life, Delaney Wright had a place in the world where her name belonged. Later that afternoon, she was washing Wade's scraped knee by the well when she saw it. A glint of gold. The black carriage. Again. It rolled slowly toward the house, same wheels, same driver. But this time, Temperance Dreen wasn't alone. A man stepped out behind her, tall, severe, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a long coat that smelled like judgment. The rancher was at Delaney's side before she even turned to call him. "That's a judge," he murmured. "A circuit man. I figured she wasn't done yet." Temperance's voice was smooth as silk dipped in ice. "Mr. Judge, that's the woman. The one unlawfully claiming property and children not hers by law or blood." Delaney stepped forward. "We already stood in court." He didn't flinch. "Now you'll stand again." He asked for documents. She handed him copies, statements, rewritten letters, but his eyes stayed hard. "Do you have the original will?" he asked. "No," she said. "It was stolen." "Convenient," Temperance said dryly. Delaney's voice cracked. "It's the truth." The judge's gaze didn't soften. "I'll hear both sides. Then I'll decide." He turned and walked up the steps toward the porch, eyes scanning the freshly nailed sign. "Writes home." Delaney's jaw tightened. She wasn't just protecting a name anymore. She was fighting to keep the truth alive. The second courtroom wasn't made of stone or polished wood. It was the barn. The judge, grim-faced and tired from the road, chose to hold the hearing on the property itself. "If this place matters so much," he said, "then let me see what you're fighting for." The morning sun spilled through the open doors, casting long shadows across hay bales and dirt-streaked boots. Delaney stood in front of a worn table they'd turned into a bench. Her hands trembled, but her back was straight. Temperance stood across from her, eyes cold, mouth taut. The children sat nearby, quiet as church mice. The rancher stood behind them, arms folded, unmoving. The judge reviewed the satchel's contents, letters rewritten by hand, testimonies from townspeople, photos drawn in colored pencil by Wade and Nell. "No original will?" he asked. "No, sir," Delaney answered. "But these are the pieces Everett left behind." Temperance's lawyer rose. "And none of it proves she has a legal claim to the children." "She doesn't have blood," Temperance said coolly. "She has memory. Memory can be bought." That was when Micah stepped forward, the oldest of the children. Quiet, steady, his shirt too big, his shoes worn, but his eyes unwavering. "She's our mama," he said. The judge blinked. "You want to speak?" Micah nodded. "I know what family means. Not because someone told me, because I lived it. She stayed. Every night Dad coughed blood, she stayed. When Wade got lost in the storm, she found him. When we didn't have bread, she fed us soup from weeds. You can call that memory, but we call it love." Delaney covered her mouth, her eyes shining. The judge looked to the others. "Does anyone else wish to speak?" And one by one they rose. Miss Ainsley, who brought school records. The grocer with scribbled receipts marked "Ept," paid in full. The preacher with a letter Everett had once written. Even the stable hand who said, "I once saw her carrying 3 kids in the rain while holding a busted umbrella with her teeth." They all spoke of moments, small, unseen, but real. "She didn't build this place with lumber," the preacher said. "She built it with choice." When the room finally fell quiet, the judge turned to Delaney. "Do you want to say anything else?" She looked at her children, at the rancher, at the sunlight pouring over the beams above. "I used to think I was invisible," she said. "No family. No name. Just a girl who showed up and didn't leave. Everett gave me his name not by marrying me, but by writing it beside mine. He made me seen, and I've done my best to pass that on to these children, to this land, to the people who needed someone who stayed. That's all I have. But it's real." The judge nodded slowly. Then he reached for the paper. "This court finds Delaney Wright to be the legal guardian of Micah, Nell, Wade, and Nora, with all rights and responsibilities. The ranch shall remain in her care as steward and head of household, pending full probate transfer. These children belong with her." Temperance stood still as stone. "You will regret this," she said. "No," Delaney said softly. "I regret letting you near them in the first place." The judge signed the papers. The barn didn't cheer. It just breathed, like something long dead had come back to life. That evening, as the stars came out, Delaney sat on the porch with Hattie in her arms. The other children chased fireflies through the fields. The rancher stood beside her, silent. "You ever gonna come in?" she asked. He looked at her. "Only if there's room." "There's always room," she whispered. "You don't need papers. Just stay." He stepped forward, his hand brushing hers, and in the space between them, quiet and wide and steady, was something better than victory. It was home.